Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, I am asking the question simply, what if the Toronto Maple Leafs traded goaltender Frederik Andersen? But make sure to pay close attention to how I worded that. I did not say that the Maple Leafs should trade him right now. I am simply putting the question out there so that we can think about it as we move forward throughout the season. I'm not saying that they should, and I'm not saying that I'd want them to. I'm just asking the question, what if? But before we dive into that, we need to do a little bit of housekeeping in terms of the salary cap situation regarding Nick Robertson's injury. And from this tweet from James Myrtle, it seems like Sheldon Keefe is convinced that Nick Robertson is not going to be back anytime soon or within the next week or two. We'll know more in the coming days. But I said this before in my previous videos, once the injury started for the Toronto Maple Leafs, it was going to be a very sticky situation for them to navigate in terms of the salary cap, because now, with Nick Robertson injured, they can't send him to the taxi squad, and they don't have enough cap space to recall anyone else. So at this point, the Maple Leafs would have three options to navigate this situation. They can go into Monday's game having one fewer skater than required, and that would allow them to use a $0 emergency recall for the same amount of money of Nick Robertson's salary, so $821,000, or they could place Nick Robertson on long-term injury reserve, and that would afford them to be able to recall Alexander Barabanov or somebody else, or they can place Aaron Dell on waivers. Now, the emergency recall is not meant to be permanent. If Nick Robertson's going to be injured for 2, 3, 4 weeks even, the Maple Leafs are going to have to either place him on long-term injury reserve or put somebody on waivers. Placing Nick Robertson on long-term injury reserve, in my mind, would be a little bit wasteful, because that would make it, like Earl said, very hard for the Maple Leafs to have any sort of cap flexibility, because even though that number says $550,000 there, that is a false $550,000. If the Maple Leafs don't use that money, they don't have access to that money. And I don't see anywhere else on the roster where $550,000 could be useful to them at this point unless they were to make a trade, and I don't think that that's very likely. So they wouldn't be able to take advantage of the full cap relief that they would get in placing Nick Robertson on long-term injury reserve. There are both advantages and disadvantages to using long-term injury reserve, and after having to use it for the last 6 or 7 years in regards to Nathan Horton and David Clarkson, I think the Maple Leafs were kind of happy to finally get out from underneath it. So I think it would be beneficial if the Maple Leafs just rolled the dice and placed Aaron Dell on waivers for purpose of him being on the taxi squad, because then it would just be business as usual for them. They could continue doing what they were doing already and swapping Alexander Barabanov out for either another forward or another defenseman and still accumulate some salary cap space, which is going to be useful to them when it comes to making trades later on in the season if they wish to do that. But for now, as Lou Lamoriello always used to say, if you have time, use it, and I suspect that the Maple Leafs will use the emergency recall to start with until they fully understand Nick Robertson's situation and his injury. But back to the reason why you clicked on the video in the first place, and that's Frederik Andersen. Frederik Andersen is in a 4-way tie for being in the top 14 highest paid goalies in the entire NHL. I don't hate this guy. I don't have anything against him. I want him to succeed. I want him to be just as good as he was in the first 3 years that he was here with the Toronto Maple Leafs, because he was absolutely amazing in those seasons. But if Frederik Andersen is not going to play like a top 15 goalie, the Maple Leafs might be better off exploring trading him. I used these stats in my season preview video, and they paint the picture of Frederik Andersen's 2019-2020 season perfectly. A really good way to describe his season last year is that he stopped a lot of shots that he probably shouldn't, but he also let in a lot of soft goals. And that is perfectly reflected in this stint of games when Sheldon Keefe first took over as Maple Leafs head coach, where he had the second highest high danger save percentage, but the worst medium danger save percentage. And to me, what do you attribute that to? If you're not stopping the shots from the top of the circle, but you're stopping the shots in the blue paint, point blank shooting opportunities, what is that? Is that just luck? Is that you not being able to see the puck properly? I don't know. Because in the following stretch of games from January 6th until the end of the season, he was no longer stopping those point-blank opportunities, and his high-danger save percentage absolutely plummeted. You can blame it on the defense, but also from these 2 stretches of games, there wasn't that much of a difference in the volume of high-danger shots that he was facing. But listen to the wording that I'm about to use here, because it really does finish the picture that I'm trying to paint here. I'm not saying that the Maple Leafs defense last season was good or even close to passable. I'm not trying to make that remark. What I will point to is in both of these samples, Frederik Andersen wasn't even in the top 10 in terms of the volume of high danger shots against that other goalies faced. There were 16 other goalies in this sample and 15 other goalies in this sample that faced a higher volume of high danger shots against. I think that it's a pretty fair evaluation to say that Frederik Andersen stopped a lot of pucks that other goalies wouldn't, but over the last year or so, he's let in a lot of soft goals. The only reason why I'm being so hard on Frederik Andersen is because he is being paid to be a top 10 or a top 15 goalie in the league, and he has produced nowhere near that over the last year or so. Now, some of you may be sitting there asking yourself, well, if Frederik Andersen hasn't been very good, who's going to take a goalie who has a $5 million cap hit, who's not what he used to be? And, well, the good thing about that is that the Maple Leafs paid out a $4 million signing bonus to Frederik Andersen before the season started. So throughout the year, he's only owed $1 million. So as long as they can make the salary cap work, the team that would be theoretically acquiring Frederik Andersen would only have to pay him $1 million to be their goalie. And this isn't even a video endorsing Jack Campbell or Aaron Dell, but at this point, over the last year or so, would the Maple Leafs be any worse off with those guys than they have been with Frederik Andersen? Because if you were asking me the question in a vacuum, would the Toronto Maple Leafs be better off with Jack Campbell and Aaron Dell over Frederik Andersen, I would say no. But if the Maple Leafs were to trade Frederik Andersen and free up that cap space, they would have $5.6 million to further improve this roster here. You want to go out and go get another forward? You got room to do that. You want to go out and get another defenseman? You got room to do that. You want to possibly even move out a guy like Justin Hull to upgrade this team even further? Well, then that just adds to the cap space and the amount of flexibility that you have in order to do that. $7.6 million is enough money to go out there and get a top 4 defenseman on the market. It's enough money to go out there and get a top 4 defenseman and a forward to fit into your top 9. And if you add those two players to your team, does that close the gap in not having Frederik Andersen? Is this team any better or worse off? All those other things are up in the air and for you to interpret of what you think on your own. But the thing that I can say for sure is that Frederik Andersen is being paid like a top 15 goalie, and he hasn't been anywhere close to that for over a year now. And like I said in another video on this channel, if there was ever a year to make a run for it, if there was ever a year to trade a top prospect or to even trade a first round pick to beef up your roster, it's this year for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and that has everything to do with a Canadian team guaranteed a spot in the Final Four this year. All the Maple Leafs have to do is be the best team in the Canadian division, and they will make the conference finals. But the question you have to ask yourself, if you're Kyle Dubas or if you're a fan of this team, can you wait for Frederik Andersen to turn this around? Is this just the normal Frederik Andersen that we always see at the beginning of the season, where he is a slow starter and maybe by February or March he's in full season swing? Maybe this is a guy who's played a lot of games over the last 4 years or so, and having Jack Campbell, having a consistent backup goalie who you can rely upon to give this guy some rest, maybe you see the benefit of that later in the season. I'm trying to give him the benefit of the doubt here, but the Maple Leafs really don't have a lot of time to make this decision. Like I pointed out in that previous video and just a couple of seconds ago, they have a very unique situation in front of them where all they have to do, I'll say it again, is be the best Canadian team and they make the conference finals. So I'm not saying that I would or that they should, but what if the Toronto Maple Leafs move on from Frederik Andersen? Let me know down in the comment section what your thoughts are. Make sure to leave me a like on the video if you did like it, and subscribe for more, because more is always on the way. And guys, remember, we're just getting going here.